Welcome. We are embarking on an intensive examination of a film that, perhaps more successfully than any other this century, managed to communicate some of the biggest themes of our time.
Things like environmental catastrophe, our dependence on technology, corporate dominance, and, well, the enduring nature of love.
And it did all of that while largely dispensing with dialogue.
That is the magic of Wall-E. Our mission today is a comprehensive exploration of the 2008 animated romantic science fiction film.
And we should be clear, we're not just here to recount the plot.
No, not at all. This is a detailed study of the film's lasting influence, the staggering technical achievements that made its silence so expressive, and the thematic depth that ensures it's still so relevant today. We're sort of treating the material around this film as an archaeological dig in itself.
Okay, let's unpack this phenomenal piece of work. We're talking about a true landmark from Pixar Animation Studios for Walt Disney Pictures. The team behind this vision is, I think, essential to understand.
Absolutely. You have director Andrew Stanton, who also co-wrote the screenplay with Jim Reardon.
And that was based on a story he developed much earlier with Pete Docter.
Right. And then you have Jim Morris as producer, and of course the instantly recognizable, very emotive score by Thomas Newman.
It's a team that engineered something far beyond, your standard animated movie.
And its historical significance is already cemented. Just recently, in 2021, Wall-E was selected for preservation in the U.S. National Film Registry by the Library of Congress.
Which is a huge deal. That designation is only for works deemed culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant.
And it was only the second Pixar film to ever get that honor, right after the original Toy Story.
And here's where it gets really interesting for anyone who studies cinema history. In 2022, director Andrew Stanton specifically requested that Disney license the film to the Criterion Collection.
Which is almost unheard of for a film like this.
Exactly. It was then re-released as a special edition 4K Blu-ray, making it the very first Pixar or Walt Disney Pictures feature film ever to get a Criterion release.
And that decision, it signals something profound. The Criterion Collection is, historically reserved for these canonical, essential, usually live-action classics.
Films that define cinema history.
Right. Bergman, Kurosawa. By accepting Wall-E, Criterion, with Stanton's explicit encouragement, cemented its status not just as a great animated movie, but as an essential work of modern cinema. It demands academic study.
It's a complete validation of the film's artistic ambitions.
For sure.
That Criterion status really confirms what so many felt when it was released, that this was something fundamentally different, a massive artistic risk. So let's start with its origin story. The initial spark came from a legendary brainstorming lunch back in 1994.
Years before Pixar even finished its first feature, Toy Story.
Unbelievable.
That lunch was a pivotal moment in Pixar history. You had Stanton, John Lasseter, Pete Docter, and Joe Ranft. And the entire film, it sprang from this single, deeply evocative question that Stanton posed to the group.
Which was,
what if mankind had to leave Earth and somebody forgot to turn off the last robot?
that concept immediately hits you. The sheer isolation of that idea, a single being left behind in this vast, deserted landscape.
Stanton himself called it a Robinson Crusoe-esque idea. This solitary existence where the character is left alone to find meaning in ruins. It's instantly sympathetic because it taps into that primal fear of ultimate loneliness.
And the choice of what that robot did, his job, was so crucial to establishing that immediate sympathy.
Absolutely. Stanton named him Wall-E for Waste Allocation Load Lifter, Earth-class robot. By making waste collection his job, Stanton immediately framed him as the quintessential underdog.
It's a low-status, menial job, but it also speaks volumes about his persistence, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah.
And visually, that job provided a spectacular foundation for the world building. Stanton loved the visual strength of it, the stacked cubes of compacted garbage defining this entire derelict world.
It's a visual shorthand for humanity's failure.
And Wall-E's tireless, if futile, dedication. It's fascinating that the initial, much more prosaic working title was simply Trash Planet.
So the journey from that initial spark to the finished film, it wasn't exactly straightforward. It was actually set aside for many years.
It was. They worked on it for about 2 months in 1995, but the story proved incredibly difficult to crack. They just struggled with how to develop the narrative beyond that initial visual hook.
So it got shelved for a bit.
It did. Pete Docter eventually moved on to direct Monsters, Inc., and Stanton only returned to Wall-E in 2002 while he was finishing up Finding Nemo.
So what was the narrative breakthrough that brought him back? What finally cracked it?
The central idea that reignited the whole project was the introduction of the plant.
The plant.
Wally finding this small, persistent green sprout. It became the central symbol, a sign of life persisting in a world defined by decay. This external persistence mirrored Wally's own internal, almost spiritual persistence and his lonely hope for companionship. It gave the narrative a concrete goal: get the symbol of life to safety.
So once they had the lone robot on a trash world hook, the creative team then had to figure out what happened to the humans who abandoned Earth. And that evolution is, it's arguably one of the most bizarre concepts they played with.
Oh, it is. The original concept for humanity was surprisingly dark and strange before they settled on the final depiction of the travelers aboard the Axiom. Stanton had initially envisioned the descendants of humanity as these cruel alien gels.
Cruel alien gels. That sounds more like a horror film concept than a Pixar movie.
The sources describe them as completely devolved, gelatinous, boneless, legless, see-through green creatures, essentially like Jell-O. They were the extreme result of the environmental collapse and the escape into zero-gravity comfort.
But what's interesting is that this bizarre concept was actually rooted in science.
It was. Physiologist James Hicks consulted with Stanton on the concept of atrophy and the effects prolonged weightlessness would have on the human body. The gels were the ultimate exaggerated result of that physical degeneration, a total loss of form and function.
But the gels were ultimately scrapped. Why did the team decide they were, quote, too bizarre to work?
Well, it's interesting they drew a line there. The sources suggest the problem wasn't just the visual weirdness, but the danger of losing the audience's ability to sympathize with humanity.
They would have been too alien.
Too alien. They also spoke a made-up gibberish language, which Stanton worried would be too complicated and alienating. The choice of the gels meant humanity was truly lost, with no hope of redemption.
So the transition to the final depiction, the fetus-like humans, that was a deliberate choice to preserve audience empathy and the film's core metaphor.
Exactly. They became these obese, completely dependent big babies floating on their hover chairs. This shift unlocked the film's key metaphorical theme: humanity learning to stand again and grow up. The humans needed to be depicted as fetus-like so the audience could still recognize themselves in them despite their degeneration.
It made their eventual struggle to walk feel more profound.
Much more.
The innovative approach extended right into the nuts and bolts of the screenplay itself, which is remarkable given the film's almost complete lack of traditional conversation.
Right. Stanton approached the script in a highly visual manner, acknowledging the silent nature of the first act. He formatted his script in a way that was reminiscent of the process used by Dan O'Bannon for the original Alien screenplay.
How so?
O'Bannon wrote his scripts almost like haiku, where the visual descriptions were laid out in continuous lines of only a few words. Stanton did the same, constantly reinforcing that the primary focus was on visuals, movement, and sound effects, not dialogue.
Which makes the minimal robot dialogue, those iconic WALLE and EVE, sounds even more of a storytelling technique.
It was. Those few words were conventionally written, but intentionally placed in brackets within the script. That bracketed dialogue serves as a constant reminder that sound was substituting for conversation, focusing on intonation and emotional inflection rather than, actual semantic content.
Beyond the formatting, there were critical plot revisions that really strengthened the emotional core. The climax specifically went through a major change.
This is a crucial detail for understanding the film's central theme of love-defeating programming. For example, during a 2007 test screening, EVE was originally the one who got electrocuted, and Wally repaired her. It was basically a technical fix.
But they reversed that for the final version.
It was strategically reversed. Stanton made the decision so that EVE would replace her original foundational directive of bringing the plant to the captain with a far more important self-chosen and emotional directive, repairing Wally.
It emphasizes her emotional growth.
Precisely. It proves that irrational love supersedes cold logic. It changes the entire meaning of the ending.
Absolutely.
And on top of that, the creative team enhanced Wally's heroism at the climax by having him hold the holo detector open, despite being badly hurt and crushed by the ship's autopilot, Otto. The sources suggest the idea of Wally losing his memory in the final scene came after the abandoned, more technical scene where Eve had been shot and Wally gave her his own battery.
So the focus wasn't on the technical fix, it was on the sentimental, almost spiritual kiss that restored him.
Yes, this foregrounds the emotional commitment over the mechanical component. That emotional ending was so critical that they even added a unique, stylized end credits animation to clarify the film's ultimate optimistic tone.
Why did they feel that was necessary?
Stanton felt that after early screenings, about half the audience worried that the humans were too far gone and would just die out on Earth.
Oh, interesting.
So the beautiful end credits, created by Jim Capobianco, made it definitively clear that the tone was optimistic. They showed stylized versions of humans and robots working side by side in different artistic movements. Impressionism pixel art, symbolically illustrating the process of restoring the planet. It was a visual assurance that the future was bright, not bleak.
The storytelling innovations and that depth of character are matched only by the incredible technical mastery on display. The sheer scope of this production was just enormous for its time.
It really was an undertaking that raised the bar for complexity at Pixar. WALL-E was the most involved production since Monsters, Inc. The volume of material is staggering. 125,000 storyboards were required to block out the action.
And what's the typical average?
Around 75,000, so a huge increase. They weren't just animating characters, they were crafting a cinematic environment, frame by frame, that communicated emotion without dialogue.
Let's talk about the look of it and how lighting specifically communicated the emotional trajectory. Production designer Ralph Eggleston aimed for a very specific progression just through light.
This was a highly deliberate choice. He created a strong visual contrast between the two worlds. The first act on Earth used this romantic, almost golden lighting, reminiscent of a sunset. It created warmth and vulnerability for WALL-E.
Right, the world is desolate, but his little home is cozy.
Exactly. Conversely, the second act on the Axiom used cold, sterile lighting blues, whites, sharp fluorescent lines, to reflect the human's detached, automated, and antiseptic existence.
And then the third act bridges those two aesthetics.
Precisely. During the third act, that romantic, golden light slowly starts to get reintroduced into the Axiom's environment as humanity begins to reawaken, to stand up and re-engage with the effort of living. It's a visual manifestation of their rebirth.
And the derelict Earth wasn't just pulled from imagination, right? They consulted real-world locations and experts to ground those trash heaps in reality.
They did. They studied photographs and documentation of Chernobyl and the city of Sofia, Bulgaria, to inform the look of the ruined world. The art director, Anthony Christoph, who is from Bulgaria, provided specific input, recalling Sofia's historical problems with garbage storage.
So that provided a real-world anchor for those immense trash towers WALL-E climbs.
It did. Eggleston also deliberately bleached out the whites on Earth to make WALL-E feel more exposed, and used overexposed light to create this palpable sense of vastness and loneliness.
To achieve this specific, grounded aesthetic, they brought in giants of live-action cinematography, which is highly unusual for an animated feature. This is where they really blurred the line between animation and cinema.
They went to the best. Legendary cinematographers Roger Deakins and Dennis Muren, a visual effects pioneer. Their goal was not to make the animation look perfect, but to incorporate the look of 70mm film.
What exactly does that mean in practical terms for the animation?
It meant deliberately replicating the imperfections you typically associate with physical film and live-action cameras.
So things like barrel distortion.
Exactly. Barrel distortion, where straight lines bow outward at the edges of the frame. And lens flare, those streaks of light. And racking focus, shifting focus quickly between foreground and background. They even used 1970s Panavision cameras as a physical reference to replicate those handheld imperfections and the grain of the film digitally.
That's incredible detail.
It is. The sources note Stanton cited the shallow lens work in Gus Van Sant's films as a key influence, using very tight close-ups to create immediate intimacy with the characters, something usually reserved for emotional live-action drama.
That focus on live-action sensibility extended to the massive design of the Axiom. It feels less like a cartoon setting and more like an engineered, plausible environment.
The Axiom is a study in contrasts. The exterior design was inspired by modern, large-scale architecture, the high-tech, clean lines of cities like Shanghai and Dubai.
But the interior was different.
The interior drew heavily from a mid-century utopian optimism. 1960s NASA paintings and concept art for Walt Disney's Tomorrowland. Architecturally, Eggleston based the complex, flowing designs on the futuristic work of Spanish architect Santiago Calatrava.
I found the ship's internal segmentation, the class structure, fascinating because it reflects the societal stratification they were escaping.
It was meticulously planned. Eggleston divided the inside into three parts. The rear, or economy class, was stark basic gray concrete, with graphics limited to the red, blue, and white of the by and large logo.
And coach class.
Coach class, where most of the consumption happened, featured constant S-shapes in the hallways because people were always looking for the next thing to buy, what's around the corner.
And premier class, where the captain resides.
That was designed as a large, zen-like spa, limiting colors to turquoise, cream, and tan, signaling this false sense of peace and luxury. To further enhance its artificial feel, the camera movements inside the Axiom were modeled on the smooth, detached motion of a Steadicam.
Let's move to the characters. They needed to convey personality without speech, relying entirely on design and movement. Wall-E is just a masterpiece of machinist character.
Stanton's mandate was simple. Wall-E had to look and function like a machine, similar to previous Pixar successes like Luxo Jr. or R2-D2. The most famous design element, his eyes, were inspired by a pair of binoculars Stanton was distracted by during an Oakland athletics game.
Really?
Yeah. He realized the robot wouldn't need a nose or mouth, and by adding a zoom lens feature to the binoculars, they gave Wall-E a sympathetic, childlike quality, a perfect window into his soul.
And his physical mechanics were surprisingly complex, even if they look simple, because they had to reflect his function realistically.
That realism was key to generating empathy. The animators intentionally avoided giving him elbows because a waist compactor isn't designed to pull garbage.
So his arms were on a track.
Exactly, attached to a track on the sides of his body, based on the mechanical designs of inkjet printers. This movement system was critical to his posture. They could lower his arms to make him appear nervous or submissive, or raise them to show determination. Even his tank treads were inspired by a specialized wheelchair design.
EVE, on the other hand, is the complete opposite, the pinnacle of sleek, modern, almost disposable technology.
She was meant to represent the higher end of the technological spectrum. She was intentionally designed as an egg-shaped, simple, clean, and minimalist. Pixar even sought input from Apple's iconic iPod designer, Jonathan Ive.
Who was reportedly very impressed.
Yes, with her seamless, buttonless aesthetic. Her minimalist design meant the animators couldn't rely on facial expressions. They had to rely entirely on posing her egg-shaped body to express emotion. They often saw her floating movement as reminiscent of a manatee or narwhal.
And then there's the clear cinematic homage, the antagonist Ryudo, the ship's autopilot.
Ryudo is a conscious, unmistakable homage to HAL 9000 from Stanley Kubrick's 2001, A Space Odyssey.
And the musical references reinforce that connection heavily.
They do, with the intentional use of both the Blue Danube and also Sprech Zarathustra in scenes involving Otto and the captain. His physical design also implies this silent malice. His circular form, typically hanging from the ceiling, gives him a threatening, all-seeing, spider-like feel.
Let's talk about the unique use of live action. Fred Willard, as Shelby Forthright, the CEO of By and Large, is the only major live-action character in the entire film.
That was a highly specific, strategic choice by Stanton. He cast Willard specifically because he had the ideal, friendly, and insincere car salesman persona.
Which perfectly suited the character of the CEO and president of Earth who proposed the disastrous evacuation plan.
Exactly. The CEO's dialogue, like urging humanity to stay the course, was used because Stanton found it funny and a natural thing to say at the time regarding crisis management. Industrial Light and Magic handled the visual effects for those archival shots, integrating the live-action footage seamlessly into the animated world.
The voice casting for the animated characters is equally stellar, particularly the Axiom's computer.
Sigourney Weaver provided the calm, authoritative voice for the computer system. Andrew Stanton famously joked to her that she was Mother now, a direct, playful reference to the ship's computer in her iconic film Alien.
But as important as the professional voice actors were, the real genius behind the soundscape is Ben Burt, the legendary sound designer who created the robots' voices and sound effects.
This is where the technical detail really becomes fascinating. Burt's work on Wall-E was monumental, and much of it was done with physical objects and vocal filtering, rather than purely synthesized sound.
He was recommended because Stanton kept citing R2-D2 as the benchmark, right?
Right, and Burt recorded an astonishing 2,500 distinct sounds for the film. To put that into perspective, that is twice the average number of sound effects used for a Star Wars film, a record in his career. He worked in sync with the animators for years, filtering his voice to achieve the final robotic intonations.
Describing them as communicating like a toddler.
Yes, using a universal language of intonation to convey meaning and feeling.
So give us some of the specific sounds he used, because the anecdotes of improvisation are incredible.
For Wall-E's signature movement sounds, the clanking and whirring Burt didn't use modern sound libraries. He relied on a 1950 hand-cranked electrical generator he bought unused on eBay.
No way!
Yes. When Wall-E speeds up, that frantic noise is an automobile self-starter. The crushing sound when he compacts trash came from recording real cars being wrecked at a demolition derby. And that familiar sound when Wally recharges his battery is a brilliant bit of corporate cross-reference. It's the iconic Macintosh computer chime.
And Evie's sounds were just as imaginative, reflecting her high-tech design.
Her plasma cannon sound, which is surprisingly complex, was created by hanging a slinky from a ladder and hitting it with a timpani stick.
Yeah.
Burt described the result as a cousin to the blaster noise he created for Star Wars. Her smooth, high-speed flying sounds were recorded using a flying 10-foot-long radio-controlled jet plane.
And Authuno's cold, calculated voice based on the Apple Macintosh text-to-speech program.
That's Macintalk. Stanton chose it precisely because he wanted Otto to be the epitome of a robot, cold zeros and ones, calculating and soulless. The goal was to remove all human inflection. The effect was further enhanced with additional clockwork sounds to imply that he's constantly thinking.
Burt's work was exhaustive, even extending to environmental sounds.
He used his own 1987 field recordings from Niagara Falls for the Earth's wind and ran around a hall with a canvas bag to record the specific texture of the sandstorm sounds.
The sound design made the machines feel real, but the emotional anchor, especially given the lack of dialogue, must have relied entirely on Thomas Newman's score.
Newman, who had previously worked with Stanton on Finding Nemo, started writing the score very early in the production process back in 2005. This was critical because he had to compose music that could carry the emotional narrative without overwhelming the quiet character moments.
And he had to balance Stanton's desire for a purely orchestral score with the sterile reality of the Axiom scenes.
Right. He ultimately incorporated electronic elements to prevent the music from feeling, anachronistic in a futuristic setting.
But the most unexpected part of the music is the use of two specific songs from a classic Broadway musical.
Yes, the two songs from Hello, Dolly, Put on Your Sunday Clothes, and It Only Takes a Moment, are the unexpected, tender musical heart of the film. Stanton used them because he had portrayed the character Barnaby Tucker in a high school production of the musical in 1980.
And he felt the lyrics mirrored Wally's own naive hope for finding love.
Exactly. The songs are about two naive young men searching for companionship and excitement. It was a perfect match.
And the physical artifact of the film reel itself became integral to the plot.
Yes. Jim Reardon, the storyboard supervisor, suggested Wally find the film on video. Stanton then specifically included the song It Only Takes a Moment, and critically, the clip of the actors holding hands. This specific visual artifact provided a literal, understandable model for Wally to comprehend the concept of romantic love.
And the film's composer, Jerry Herman, found the incorporation of his songs to be genius.
He did, recognizing the new, poignant context given to his work.
That blending of hyper-advanced sound design, intentional visual imperfections, and nostalgic Broadway tunes created an entirely unique viewing experience, intentionally evoking silent film legends.
For sure. The entire production team immersed themselves in the history of silent cinema. The sources state the filmmakers watched a Buster Keaton and a Charlie Chaplin film every single day for almost a year during development.
And Stanton noted that Keaton's ability to communicate tremendous emotion using his great stone face gave the animators perseverance.
It did. They realized that dialogue had been relied upon too heavily since the advent of sound cinema, and they wanted to convey all necessary emotional nuance silently. They also drew heavily from non-dialogue reliant sci-fi classics like 2001, A Space Odyssey, and Silent Running.
Beyond the technical marvels, the film's lasting power really lies in its profound thematic weight. It operates as this powerful social critique disguised as a charming, almost fable-like robot love story.
The core social criticism is absolutely unambiguous. Earth is not destroyed by aliens or nuclear war. It's portrayed as an inhospitable, garbage-strewn wasteland caused entirely by an ecocide, which is directly linked to rampant consumerism, corporate greed, and environmental neglect.
It tapped directly into real-world concerns about rapidly filling landfills.
Bringing these complex ecological issues to a massive family audience.
And the source of that collapse is By and Large, or BNL, the megacorporation that dominates every single aspect of life. It's effectively a global corporatocracy.
The irony is rich and deliberate. BNL not only caused the environmental collapse, but also provided this solution facilitating humanity's evasion of the problem via the luxurious Axiom starship.
And this was more than just cinematic world building. Disney's promotion team created a massive, detailed, fictional website for BNL.
With fake press releases starting in 2057, like Wisconsin Mall granted city status, and chillingly BNL announces Police Select, underscoring how deeply this single corporate entity controlled every facet of society. It was a global nanny state.
The film also leans heavily on the theme of nostalgia and the idea of transforming garbage into sentimental treasure.
Film scholars Robin Murray and Joseph Heumann detail how nostalgia is fundamentally represented through the human artifacts Wall-E collects and cherishes, Zippo lighters, hubcaps, plastic sporks. These commonplace modern items become sentimental treasures in the bleak future, imbued with profound meaning.
It effectively positions the robot as an archaeologist for a lost human culture, teaching the audience to value what they currently discard.
Exactly. Archaeologist Ben Marwick wrote about this, noting that Wall-E acts as an archaeologist with his methodical collection and classification of artifacts, even having to face the typological dilemma of classifying a spork as either a fork or a spoon.
A small moment that forces the audience to consider the historical context of their own consumption.
And that sense of nostalgia is also driven deeply by the score. The opening shot of space slowly zooming in on trash-filled Earth set to put on your Sunday clothes reflects this deep, almost painful longing for simpler, happier times.
Ultimately, the most profound longing the film explores is for nature itself, contrasting the artificial comfort of the axiom with the tactile reality of Earth.
The film makes it abundantly clear that the ultimate goal is not more wealth or sustained luxury, but reconnection with the simple physical world. The sight and feeling of soil and the living plant brought back by EVE are what finally motivate Captain McCrae to make the pivotal decision to fight Otto and return to Earth.
The tactile experience of existence triumphs over the simulated one.
Absolutely.
The film's villain isn't a monster or an invader, it's a dependency on technology itself that has replaced effort and connection.
Technology is the complex antagonist here. The sources analyze that the humans on the Axiom have become completely separated from nature and purpose by their fully automated lifestyle, making them slaves of both technology and their own base appetites.
Andrew Stanton himself stated that the effort taken away by robots also removes humanity's need to put effort into relationships and living the messy part of life.
Right. Yet the film avoids being anti-technology in a sweeping way. It seems to argue for a balance.
That's a crucial distinction.
Christian journalist Rod Dreher, while analyzing the film, emphasized that Wall-E is not a Luddite film. He contrasted the hardworking Wall-E with the sleek Axiom robots, but pointed out that the optimistic end credits show humans and robots working alongside each other to renew the Earth.
So technology is properly used when it remains subordinate to human flourishing rather than replacing it entirely.
Exactly.
The themes also drift into profound religious and philosophical territory, particularly through the deliberate naming of the central female character.
Evie's name is a deliberate, acknowledged reference to the biblical figure. Stanton, who's a Christian, made this connection because Wall-E's initial profound loneliness strongly reminded him of Adam before God created his wife, seeking a counterpart in a desolate garden.
And the core mission of finding the plant echoes one of the oldest human stories.
The allegory runs deeper, relating directly to the Noah's Ark story. During the writing process, a Pixar employee noted that EVE finding the plant was reminiscent of the dove returning to Noah with the olive branch, signaling that land was safe and the great voyage was over. This parallel was then solidified in the story structure.
Commentators have also noted that BNL is elevated to a status that borders on a false god.
This is a powerful critique of modern consumer culture. The sources emphasize the terrifying nature of the BNL corporatocracy, acting as a societal nanny state. This is particularly highlighted in that disturbing scene where a robot teaches infants, B is for by and large, your very best friend.
It's a direct parallel to modern corporations attempting to create brand loyalty in children from their very first breath,
Replacing traditional sources of comfort and morality with commercial slogans. The entire lazy lifestyle offered by BNL on the Axiom is presented as this false paradise, one that removes suffering and effort, but also removes meaning.
And philosophically, Wall-E himself has been compared to mythical figures, elevating his simple repetitive task to a classical, heroic struggle.
He has been linked to Prometheus, who stole fire from the gods, which mirrors Wall-E bringing the literal spark of life, the plant, and the spark of love to the captain and Evie. He has also been compared to Sisyphus, eternally pushing a boulder.
Reflecting Wall-E's own eternal task of compacting garbage that keeps mounting. And what about the comparison to the myth of Euthydes?
That's one of the most poignant analogies. The scene where Wall-E expresses his love for Eve by making a sculpture of her from spare parts was compared to the Greek myth of Euthydes, where art is born out of intense longing and memory.
Suggesting that the impulse for art and creation, even among machines, is essential for defining existence.
It speaks to the entire artistic drive of Pixar itself. telling this deeply personal human story about love through the prism of these metallic characters.
The film also explores themes of human evolution.
It does. Scholars noted that the film uses two classic biological and historical watershed moments as narrative focal points. First, obligate bipedalism, the definitive evolutionary human trait of walking upright, which is demonstrated in Captain McCrae's physical struggle to rise from his chair and stand to challenge Ayatudo.
It's a literal representation of humanity finding its legs again.
Exactly. And the second is the invention of agriculture, symbolized by the plant growing into a tree during the end credits, which signals humanity's return to working the land and cultivating their future rather than consuming their present. Humanity on the axiom experienced evolution, and Wall-E and Eve become the unwitting catalyst for the next stage of human evolution.
The complexity of these themes, paired with the sheer charm and silent film pacing, ensured that Wall-E was an immediate and massive success, both critically and commercially.
Commercially, it grossed over $532 million worldwide. Critically, the reception was virtually universal acclaim, achieving a near-perfect 95 out of 100 on Metacritic. The American Film Institute noted that the film proved the only true boundaries of the animated medium are the human imagination itself.
The critical praise was almost unbelievably effusive. Richard Corliss of Time not only named it his favorite film of 2008, but his favorite film of the entire decade.
He praised its ability to connect with a huge audience, despite the main characters lacking traditional emotional signifiers like a mouth, eyebrows, shoulders, and elbows.
And you went a step further, comparing Wall-E and Eve's chemistry to that of Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn,
placing the robot couple in the pantheon of Hollywood romance. Roger Ebert also declared it the best science fiction movie in years, emphasizing that the scarcity of dialogue allowed it to cross language barriers globally.
That universal acclaim translated into significant accolades, although there was notable controversy surrounding the top-tier nominations at the Oscars.
The film won the Academy Award for Best Animated Feature and received 5 other Oscar nominations, including Best Original Screenplay, Score, and Song. However, despite being hailed as one of the very best films of the year, it was famously not nominated for Best Picture, sparking widespread controversy.
That snub was strongly criticized by prominent voices.
Indeed. Film critic Peter Travers stated, "If there was ever a time where an animated feature deserved to be nominated for Best Picture, it's Wall-E," arguing that the Academy was still operating under an outdated prejudice against animation.
It seems the Academy was still struggling with whether animation could compete outside of its designated category.
That's the consensus from the sources. Stanton later commented that he wasn't personally disappointed, but he noted that the line between live action and animation was getting so blurry that the industry was finding it harder and harder to categorize.
Regardless of the Oscar snub, it performed exceptionally well at major critical bodies.
It holds a significant record in this regard. It was the first animated feature to win Best Picture from the Los Angeles Film Critics Association. It also won Best Film from the Chicago Film Critics Association and tied for Best Film with the Boston Society of Film Critics.
These wins are a powerful endorsement of the film's artistic merit over its technical classification.
For sure. And its technical and musical brilliance was recognized with Thomas Newman and Peter Gabriel winning 2 Grammy Awards, and the script won the Nebula Award for Best Script, a major prize in the science fiction writing community.
Now, we must address the ideological response, which was deeply split, particularly among conservative commentators. The power of the film is evident in how sharply the sources disagreed on its political message. We have to report impartially on both sides of that debate.
We must. It's a reflection of the film's powerful, multifaceted themes. On one side, some conservative commentators criticized the film harshly as leftist propaganda about the evils of mankind. Greg Polowitz called it a 90-minute lecture on the dangers of overconsumption. Another critic described it as Malthusian fear-mongering.
So these views focused heavily on the film's perceived condemnation of capitalism and consumerism.
Exactly. However, there was a robust and equally compelling counter-argument from other conservative voices who interpreted the film through a completely different, more traditional lens.
How so?
Patrick J. Ford, writing for the American Conservative, argued that critics missed the fundamental lessons that actually appealed to traditional conservatism. He argued that the mass consumerism shown was a result of the overly close, corrupted ties between big business and big government.
Because by and large was not just a company, it had replaced the government.
Right. This centralized power, Ford argued, led to humanity's downfall. He stressed that the film ultimately advocated for fundamental conservative representations of value, the value of work, the nuclear family unit, genuine human interaction, and the virtue of returning to the earth to cultivate a meaningful life.
So, depending on the lens, the criticism was either that the film was too anti corporate and preachy, or that it was actually a powerful defense of traditional values against the corruption of centralized corporate power.
It just demonstrates the incredible potency of the film's social criticism. It spoke to multiple ideologies simultaneously because its central theme, as Stanton put it, was the universal concept that irrational love defeats life's programming.
The cultural legacy continues to grow. We already mentioned its inclusion in the National Film Registry in 2021 and the unprecedented Criterion Collection release in 2022.
And its enduring status is further confirmed by its placement on major retrospective lists. It was included in the New York Times, the 100 Best Movies of the 21st Century list at number 34, and on Rolling Stone's similar list at number 47. It is firmly established as a critical piece of 21st century cinematic discourse.
And finally, a clear sign of its deep emotional connection with the audience, the hobbyist phenomenon of building working recreations of Wall-E.
Yes, the love for the character is so strong that robotics hobbyists like Mike McMaster and Mike Senna have devoted years to building incredibly sophisticated, moving animatronic recreations of Wall-E and Eve. These models showcase the deep, enduring affection the public has for this small, persistent robot, and the profound message of hope he carries. In closing, what Wall-E accomplished was monumental. By stripping away dialogue and focusing on the nonverbal performance of its characters, the film was forced to rely on the genius of its sound design, the nuance of its animation, and the universality of its characters to convey massive global themes. It used a simple robot love story as the foundation to critique rampant consumerism and technological over-reliance, all while delivering a message of profound, realistic optimism about humanity's capacity for change through effort and connection.
It truly is a powerful narrative that our human capacity for irrational love and simple, tangible effort is what ultimately saves us from the logical but ultimately destructive programming of a purely automated life. It raises an important question for all of us to consider based on the themes presented in the source material. Given the film's message that love defeats programming, how much of our own current technology, our algorithms, our delivery systems, our comfortable automation relies on programming us into convenient, passive, but ultimately isolating routines, and what small, perhaps irrational acts of conscious effort or genuine human connection are needed to break free, stand up, and find genuine, meaningful existence. Thanks for listening.